Ethan had always been the kind of man people described as solid. He was the rock of his family, a man who approached life with quiet determination and a steadfast commitment to doing the right thing. As a husband, he had spent 10 years building a life with Sophie, one he thought was filled with love, mutual respect, and shared dreams. As a father, he adored his 8-year-old son, Liam, pouring his heart into creating a home where his child could grow up feeling safe and loved. Ethan wasn't flashy or boastful, but when pushed, his resolve was unshakable. And when threatened, he knew how to stand his ground. Sophie, on the other hand, was a stark contrast to Ethan's steady demeanor. Charming, ambitious, and always seeking something more, Sophie had once been the spark in their relationship. Her energy and confidence had drawn Ethan to her in the first place. But over the years, that same drive seemed to morph into restlessness. Sophie had grown dissatisfied with the life they had built, yearning for excitement and validation outside of her role as a wife and mother. When Victor entered her world, offering flattery and promises of something more, Sophie began to question whether her life with Ethan was enough. Victor was the epitome of arrogance wrapped in a tailored suit. As Sophie's boss, he exuded power and charisma, using his position to manipulate and control those around him. Victor thrived on his ability to dominate situations and people, seeing them as mere pawns in his game. When he noticed Sophie's restlessness, he wasted no time exploiting it, presenting himself as the antidote to her dissatisfaction. For Victor, it wasn't about love or even desire. It was about conquest and control. Ethan's closest ally in the storm that was about to unfold was his sister, Chloe. Fiercely loyal and sharp-tongued, Chloe had always been Ethan's protector, even when they were kids. She saw through people's facades with uncanny clarity, and her protective instincts kicked into high gear when Sophie's true colors began to show. Chloe's no-nonsense attitude and unwavering support would prove invaluable as Ethan navigated the fallout of his crumbling marriage. Then there was Liam, Ethan and Sophie's bright, sensitive son. At just 8 years old, Liam was perceptive enough to sense when something was wrong, even if he didn't fully understand the complexities of adult relationships. His well-being became Ethan's primary motivation, the reason he refused to let Sophie's betrayal derail their family entirely. Everything Ethan did, he did with Liam's future in mind. Max, Ethan's best friend since college, played the role of confidant and strategist. A lawyer with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit, Max had a knack for cutting through emotional turmoil to focus on solutions. When Ethan's world started to fall apart, Max stepped in with a steady hand, helping him navigate both the legal and emotional challenges that lay ahead. Finally, there was Detective Carter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for uncovering the truth no matter how deeply it was buried. Though he wouldn't enter the picture until later, Carter's involvement would be crucial in exposing Victor's manipulative and predatory behavior, giving Ethan the tools he needed to fight back. Ethan's life had seemed stable, even happy, until Sophie's shocking ultimatum brought it crashing down. It was a quiet evening at home when she broached the topic, her tone casual but her words cutting like a knife. "We need to talk," Sophie had said, sitting across from Ethan at the dining table. The look on her face was one of forced confidence, a veneer of control masking the turmoil underneath. Ethan, oblivious to the storm brewing, set his coffee mug down and gave her his full attention. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his tone warm and curious. Sophie hesitated for a moment before speaking, as if trying to find the right words to frame her demand. "I think we need to try something new in our marriage. I've been doing some thinking, and I believe an open marriage could be the answer." The words hung in the air like a grenade waiting to detonate. Ethan blinked, his mind struggling to process what he just heard. "An open marriage," he repeated slowly, his voice laced with disbelief. "Yes," Sophie said, her tone growing firmer. "It's not that I don't love you, Ethan. I just feel like we've fallen into a routine, and I need something more. This could be good for us, for our relationship." Ethan's shock quickly turned to anger, but he held it in check, determined to remain calm. "And if I say no?" he asked, his voice dangerously even. Sophie bit her lip, glancing down at her hands before dropping the second bombshell. "Then, there's another option. My boss, Victor, he's interested in me." He's suggested that we spend a night together. Just once. It doesn't have to mean anything, but it could be what I need to feel fulfilled. Ethan stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. The betrayal in her words was staggering, but what enraged him even more was her audacity. She wasn't just asking for permission to cheat. She was demanding it, presenting it as a solution to their marital problems. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, with a calmness that belied the storm raging inside him, he leaned forward. "So those are my options?" he asked. "Open marriage, or you spend a night with your boss?" Sophie nodded hesitantly, clearly unsure of how he would respond. Ethan's lips curled into a cold smile, his voice steady and sharp as a blade. "Here's my option. You can either pack your bags and leave, or you can watch me deal with Victor, and trust me, you won't like how that ends. Either way, this marriage is over." Sophie's eyes widened in shock, her carefully crafted confidence crumbling under Ethan's unwavering gaze. She had underestimated him, thinking he would either capitulate or fight for her affection. But Ethan wasn't interested in playing games. He was done. That night marked the beginning of the end for Ethan and Sophie's marriage. Ethan's mind raced as he sat in the quiet of their bedroom, contemplating the life they had built and how quickly it had unraveled. But amid the pain and anger, one thought stood out: Liam. His son deserved better than to grow up in a house filled with lies and betrayal. Ethan resolved to protect Liam at all costs. Divorce wasn't just about ending his marriage, it was about safeguarding his family's future. As he began to formulate a plan, he realized that this wasn't just a fight for his dignity, it was a fight for the life he and Liam deserved. The calm before the storm was over. The battle was about to begin. Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing as Sophie sat across from him in their kitchen, repeating her demand with the audacity of someone who thought she held all the cards. Her words dripped with self-righteousness as she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed defensively. "I've given you 10 years of my life, Ethan," she said, her voice sharp. 10 years of putting everyone else first. "I'm not saying I don't love you, but I need something more. Something exciting." Ethan's hands clenched into fists under the table. He worked tirelessly to provide for their family, sacrificing his own comfort and dreams to ensure that Sophie and Liam had everything they needed. And yet, here she was, painting herself as the victim of a routine life she had willingly built with him. "So, your solution is to cheat on me?" Ethan said, his voice calm but laced with fury. "To invite your boss into our marriage?" "It's not cheating if we agree on it," Sophie countered, her tone defensive. "And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think it could help us. Victor understands me, Ethan. He makes me feel seen." Ethan felt the words hit him like a slap. "Seen?" he repeated, his tone icy. "You want excitement? I'll give you excitement, starting with the divorce papers." Sophie's eyes widened in shock. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice faltering. "You're just saying that because you're angry. We can work through this." Ethan stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "There's no working through this, Sophie. You made your choice the moment you entertained this idea. I'm done." He left the room, leaving Sophie to sit in stunned silence. For the first time, she realized she had underestimated Ethan. She had expected him to fight for her, to plead with her to stay, to meet Victor's challenge head-on. Instead, Ethan was walking away, and the power dynamic she had counted on was crumbling before her eyes. It didn't take long for Ethan to see Victor's fingerprints all over Sophie's behavior. The man had clearly been planting seeds of discontent in her mind for months, preying on her insecurities and amplifying her dissatisfaction. Victor wasn't just Sophie's boss. He was a manipulator, a predator who thrived on controlling others and bending them to his will. Sophie, for all her faults, had been lured in by Victor's promises. He had dangled promotions, financial independence, and a glamorous lifestyle in front of her, making her believe that Ethan's steady, dependable love was holding her back. Victor's charm masked his true nature, but Ethan saw through it immediately. Ethan's suspicions were confirmed when Victor contacted him directly. It started with a smug email, casually dismissing Ethan's anger and asserting his own superiority. "Ethan, I understand this must be difficult for you, but Sophie deserves more than you can offer. You should step aside gracefully and let her find the happiness she deserves. Fighting this will only make it harder for everyone involved. Asterisk. The email infuriated Ethan, but he refused to take the bait. Instead, he began planning his next move. If Victor thought he could taunt Ethan into submission, he was sorely mistaken. Victor escalated his tactics, even calling Ethan to gloat. "You're a good guy, Ethan," Victor said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But let's face it, you're not what Sophie needs. She needs someone who can match her ambition, her passion. Why don't you make this easy on yourself and step aside?" Ethan's response was calm and measured, but his words carried the weight of a promise. "You're a predator, Victor. You've manipulated my wife into believing your lies, but this isn't over. You'll regret ever stepping into my life." Victor laughed dismissively, but Ethan's resolve only hardened. This wasn't just about Sophie's betrayal anymore. It was about exposing Victor for the manipulative fraud he was. Ethan knew he couldn't face this battle alone. He turned to Max, his best friend and confidant, who had always been a voice of reason in Ethan's life. Over a beer at Max's house, Ethan laid everything out: the ultimatum, Sophie's affair, and Victor's attempts to assert dominance. Max listened intently, his jaw tightening as Ethan recounted the details. "That guy sounds like a great piece of work," Max said, shaking his head. "But he's not invincible. We'll figure out a way to handle this." Max immediately began helping Ethan strategize. As a lawyer, he knew the importance of building a strong case for custody and asset protection. "Start documenting everything," Max advised. "Text messages, emails, anything that shows Sophie's behavior and Victor's involvement. The more evidence you have, the better your chances of coming out of this clean." Ethan took Max's advice to heart. He started keeping meticulous records, saving every email and screenshot, every text message that hinted at Sophie and Victor's relationship. He also began keeping a journal, noting Sophie's erratic behavior and her neglectful attitude toward Liam. Chloe, Ethan's sister, was equally supportive. When Ethan told her what had happened, she was furious. "She doesn't get to screw up your life and hurt Liam in the process," Chloe said. "Whatever you need, I'm here." Chloe stepped in to help with Liam, ensuring that he felt loved and secure despite the turmoil at home. She took him to school, helped with homework, and created a sense of stability that Ethan was deeply grateful for. Ethan knew that divorce was inevitable, but his primary concern was protecting Liam. He couldn't allow Sophie's betrayal to disrupt their son's life any more than it already had. With Max's guidance, Ethan began laying the groundwork for a custody battle. He hired a top-tier divorce attorney, someone Max had recommended, and shared all the evidence he had gathered. The attorney assured Ethan that he had a strong case, particularly given Sophie's infidelity and Victor's toxic influence. At home, Ethan continued to play the long game. He didn't confront Sophie outright, choosing instead to let her dig her own grave. She continued to spend time with Victor, oblivious to the fact that Ethan was documenting every move. Ethan's patience wasn't born out of passivity. It was a calculated decision to ensure that when the time came, he would have the upper hand. As the days passed, Sophie began to sense that something had shifted. Ethan's calm demeanor unnerved her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was planning something. She tried to provoke him, to elicit a reaction that would validate her belief that he was the problem. But Ethan didn't take the bait. Instead, he focused on Liam, pouring all his energy into being the best father he could be. His love for his son became his anchor, grounding him even as the storm continued to rage around him. The stage was set for the battle to come. Ethan was ready to fight for his son, his dignity, and his future. And he wouldn't rest until Victor and Sophie faced the full consequences of their actions. The fallout was only beginning. Ethan knew there was more to Victor than the arrogant, smooth-talking facade he presented to the world. Victor's manipulation of Sophie wasn't an isolated incident. It was a calculated move by a man who thrived on power and control. With Max's help, Ethan began to dig deeper into Victor's past, uncovering a disturbing pattern of behavior that painted a far darker picture. Max, ever the strategist, started by pulling public records and digging through social media. What he found was a history of high turnover rates at Victor's company, especially among female employees in positions directly under his management. This was no coincidence. Former employees had left cryptic posts online hinting at an abusive and toxic work environment. One comment in particular caught Max's attention. "Working there was the biggest mistake of my life. I wish I'd spoken up sooner, but he's untouchable." Curious and motivated, Max reached out to one of the women, Emily, a former assistant who had worked closely with Victor. After some convincing, she agreed to meet with Max and Ethan. Sitting in a quiet cafe, Emily recounted her harrowing experience. Victor had started by offering her mentorship, then escalated to inappropriate comments, and finally coercion. He used his position of power to manipulate her into a relationship, threatening her career when she tried to end it. "Victor makes you believe you're special," Emily said, her voice trembling as she relived the memories. "But the moment you're no longer useful to him, he discards you like you're nothing. He destroyed my confidence, my career, and nearly my life." Emily had kept emails and messages from Victor, reluctant to come forward until now. With Ethan's support, she finally felt ready to take action. She provided this evidence to Detective Carter, a seasoned investigator who immediately saw the gravity of the situation. Carter began piecing together a broader case against Victor, connecting Emily's story to others who had suffered under his control. Ethan learned through Carter's investigation that Sophie wasn't Victor's first victim, far from it. Victor had preyed on vulnerable women for years, using the same tactics to manipulate them. Promises of promotions, lavish gifts, and validation were all part of his arsenal. But once the women pushed back or became inconvenient, he discarded them without a second thought. The more Ethan uncovered, the more determined he became to stop Victor. This wasn't just about his marriage anymore. It was about bringing justice to the women Victor had hurt and ensuring no one else fell into his trap. As Ethan delved deeper into Victor's manipulative schemes, he began noticing unsettling patterns in Sophie's behavior. Receipts from high-end boutiques he'd never heard of, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account, and extravagant gifts she claimed were from sales raised red flags. The truth hit hard. Sophie had been siphoning money from their finances to fund her new lifestyle, a lifestyle Victor encouraged and benefited from. Ethan found physical evidence in their home, a necklace in a luxury brand box and receipts for dinners and hotel stays far beyond Sophie's usual spending habits. The discovery of a handwritten note from Victor, found tucked into her dresser drawer, was the final straw. The note, filled with over-the-top compliments and promises of a future together, confirmed what Ethan already suspected. Victor was grooming Sophie as part of his twisted game. When Ethan confronted Sophie, she didn't deny the affair. Instead, she doubled down, defending her actions as a reaction to feeling neglected in their marriage. "You don't understand me, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of guilt and defiance. "Victor listens. He supports me in ways you never did." Ethan's fury simmered beneath the surface, but he kept his composure. "Supports you?" he said coldly. "By manipulating you? By draining our account to fund his ego? Sophie, wake up. He's not your savior. He's a predator, and you're just another pawn in his game." But Sophie refused to see reason, clinging to Victor's empty promises as though they were her lifeline. Her words only strengthened Ethan's resolve to sever ties completely. He realized that Sophie was too far under Victor's influence to see the truth, and any chance of salvaging their marriage had evaporated. Detective Carter's investigation and Ethan's personal findings created a turning point in Ethan's fight against Victor and Sophie's betrayal. Carter's case against Victor gained traction as more victims came forward, emboldened by Emily's bravery. Each testimony revealed the extent of Victor's predatory behavior and painted a damning picture of the man who had upended Ethan's life. At the same time, Ethan began building his own case against Sophie. He compiled evidence of her financial mismanagement, infidelity, and neglectful behavior toward Liam. The goal wasn't just to end the marriage. It was to protect Liam and ensure that he grew up in a stable, loving environment free from Sophie's destructive choices and Victor's toxic influence. As the pieces fell into place, Ethan's anger transformed into determination. He had spent too long feeling blindsided and powerless, but now he was taking control. He wasn't just reacting to the betrayal. He was actively shaping his and Liam's future, ensuring they would emerge stronger on the other side. Ethan's journey through layers of betrayal revealed not only the depths of Victor's manipulation, but also the cracks in Sophie's character. While the pain of her betrayal was sharp, Ethan found strength in the knowledge that he was no longer tied to a toxic situation. With Max, Chloe, and Detective Carter by his side, he had a solid support system, and with Liam as his anchor, he had a clear purpose. Victor's true nature was being exposed, Sophie's web of lies was unraveling, and Ethan was finally in control. The next chapter would be about justice, closure, and rebuilding. A fight Ethan was more than ready to take on. Ethan had reached his limit. After weeks of enduring taunts, manipulation, and the emotional fallout of Sophie's betrayal, he knew it was time to confront Victor directly. The predator had lurked in the shadows long enough, pulling Sophie's strings and spreading chaos in Ethan's life. But Victor's smug arrogance had made him careless, and Ethan was ready to use that to his advantage. Max had tipped him off about Victor's habits, including his frequent visits to an upscale restaurant in the city. It was Victor's favorite place to flaunt his wealth and charm his latest conquests. Ethan planned his approach carefully, ensuring he had everything he needed to make this confrontation count. When Ethan walked into the restaurant that evening, dressed in his usual understated style, he stood out in the sea of tailored suits and polished surfaces. He spotted Victor immediately, sitting at a corner table, surrounded by a small group of admirers, his booming laugh cutting through the low hum of conversation. Ethan strode across the room, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside him. The chatter at Victor's table died down as Ethan approached, and Victor leaned back in his chair, his trademark smirk plastered across his face. Well, Victor drawled, eyeing Ethan with mock amusement. Didn't think you'd have the guts to show up here. Ethan ignored the jab and placed both hands on the table, leaning in just enough to make Victor feel the weight of his presence. We need to talk, he said, his voice low and steady. Victor waved his hand dismissively. Talk? About what? Sophie's happier with me, Ethan. You know it. I know it. Just let it go. You're out of your depth here. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he refused to let Victor see how deeply his words cut. Happier? Ethan repeated, his voice razor-sharp. You've manipulated her, lied to her, and used her to stroke your own ego. You're a parasite, Victor. And I'm here to make sure you know your time is up. Victor's smirk faltered for a moment, but his bravado quickly returned. You think you can intimidate me? He said, leaning forward. I've dealt with men like you before. Weak, desperate, clinging to something that's already gone. Face it, Ethan. You've lost. Those words were the last straw. Ethan's fist connected with Victor's jaw before anyone at the table could react. The impact sent Victor sprawling backward, his chair tipping over as he crashed to the floor. Gasps erupted from the other diners, and a hush fell over the restaurant as all eyes turned to the commotion. Victor scrambled to his feet, his face red with both rage and embarrassment. You're going to regret that, he snarled, lunging at Ethan. But Ethan was ready. Years of suppressed frustration and pain fueled his movements as he sidestepped Victor's clumsy attack, grabbing him by the arm and twisting it sharply. Victor let out a howl of pain as the sound of a crack echoed through the room. He stumbled, his leg buckling beneath him as he fell once again, this time colliding with a nearby table. Witnesses whispered among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. Victor's groans of pain were loud enough to draw the restaurant manager, who rushed over to assess the situation. Ethan straightened, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He provoked me, Ethan said calmly, gesturing to the crowd around them. There are plenty of witnesses who can confirm that. Several people nodded in agreement, murmuring about how Victor had taunted Ethan from the moment he arrived. Even the manager, who had overheard part of the exchange, seemed to side with Ethan. Paramedics arrived shortly after to tend to Victor's injuries. As they wheeled him out on a stretcher, Ethan caught his eye one last time. That's the last time you mess with my family, he said quietly, his voice cold and resolute. Victor said nothing, his humiliation complete. The next day, Ethan made good on his promise to end his marriage. He met with his lawyer, Max's recommended colleague, and finalized the divorce papers. The documents were thorough, detailing Sophie's infidelity and presenting evidence of her neglectful behavior toward Liam. Ethan's case for custody was airtight, thanks to the meticulous records he had kept and the witnesses willing to testify on his behalf. Ethan ensured that Sophie was served the papers in the most public way possible, at her workplace. It was a calculated move, designed to make her confront the reality of her actions. The courier arrived just as Sophie was finishing a meeting, handing her the envelope in front of her colleagues. The color drained from Sophie's face as she read the contents. Her co-workers exchanged glances, whispering among themselves as the truth began to circulate. To make matters worse, Victor, still nursing his injuries, witnessed the scene from his office window. His fury and humiliation were compounded by the knowledge that Ethan had outmaneuvered him yet again. With Sophie reeling and Victor effectively neutralized, Ethan focused on securing his future with Liam. He worked closely with his lawyer to present a clear case for sole custody, emphasizing his role as a stable and loving parent. The evidence of Sophie's affair and Victor's toxic influence painted a damning picture, one that the court would find hard to ignore. Chloe and Max continued to support Ethan every step of the way, offering both practical assistance and emotional encouragement. Liam, unaware of the full extent of the drama, found comfort in the consistency and love Ethan provided. The climactic showdown at the restaurant marked a turning point in Ethan's journey. He had faced Victor head-on, dismantling the man's confidence and exposing him for the bully he truly was. The public nature of the confrontation ensured that Victor's reputation took a significant hit, further isolating him from those who had once admired his charisma. For Sophie, the divorce papers and the fallout from Victor's injury were a harsh wake-up call. She had gambled everything on a relationship built on lies and manipulation, and now she was left to face the consequences. Meanwhile, Ethan emerged from the chaos stronger, more determined than ever to rebuild his life and protect his son. The showdown wasn't just about physical confrontation. It was about reclaiming power, asserting boundaries, and ensuring that justice was served. And for Ethan, it was only the beginning of a new chapter. Sophie had always loved the idea of being admired. Her colleagues often envied her confidence, style, and the seemingly perfect life she portrayed. But the events following her affair and Victor's public humiliation turned her world upside down. The unraveling began almost immediately after Ethan's dramatic confrontation with Victor at the restaurant. News of the altercation spread quickly through Victor's company. At first, the whispers were confined to the office halls, rumors about how Victor had been physically taken down by Sophie's husband in a public setting. But as the details emerged, including Victor's inappropriate relationship with Sophie and his long history of workplace misconduct, the scandal exploded. Employees who had previously stayed silent about Victor's manipulative behavior began coming forward, emboldened by the public nature of his downfall. The company launched an internal investigation, uncovering years of unethical practices, inappropriate relationships with subordinates, financial improprieties, and even instances of harassment. Victor's once pristine image as a charismatic and powerful leader crumbled under the weight of the evidence. He was placed on immediate suspension while the investigation concluded, and eventually, he was terminated. The company released a statement condemning his behavior, attempting to distance itself from the scandal. For Sophie, the fallout was devastating. Many of her colleagues, who had once admired her for her confidence and charm, now saw her in a new light. They whispered behind her back, questioning how much she had known about Victor's actions and whether she had been complicit. Some assumed she had used her relationship with Victor to climb the corporate ladder, while others viewed her as a victim who had been foolish enough to fall for his lies. Regardless of their opinions, one thing was clear. Sophie was no longer respected or welcomed in her professional circle. The isolation hit hard. Sophie found herself excluded from meetings, overlooked for projects, and avoided in the break room. Even casual acquaintances stopped returning her calls, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Her once bright career now felt like a house of cards, collapsing under the weight of her decisions. As the investigation into Victor continued, Sophie began to see the cracks in his facade. The man who had promised her excitement, independence, and a better life revealed himself to be nothing more than a self-serving predator. She overheard whispers from former colleagues about the way Victor had discarded other women once they were no longer useful to him. The stories were eerily familiar. Empty promises, manipulation, and eventual abandonment. Sophie tried to confront Victor, but he brushed her off, his charm replaced by indifference. "You knew what this was," he said coldly, his once golden voice now dripping with disdain. "Don't act like you're some innocent victim." The realization hit Sophie like a ton of bricks. She had sacrificed her marriage, her reputation, and her son's trust for a man who had never cared about her beyond his own gratification. Her relationship with Victor quickly crumbled, leaving her alone to face the consequences of her actions. While Sophie's professional and personal life fell apart, Ethan was working tirelessly to secure Liam's future. With Max's help, Ethan built an airtight custody case, presenting evidence of Sophie's neglectful behavior, poor judgment, and Victor's toxic influence. In court, Ethan's calm and composed demeanor contrasted sharply with Sophie's increasingly erratic behavior. The records Ethan had kept, text messages, financial records, and accounts of Sophie's time spent with Victor, painted a clear picture of a mother who had prioritized her own desires over her responsibilities. The testimony from witnesses, including Chloe and even some of Sophie's former colleagues, further supported Ethan's case. Sophie tried to defend herself, arguing that her actions didn't make her a bad mother. But her arguments fell flat in the face of the evidence. The court was particularly concerned about the impact Victor's influence could have had on Liam, citing the need for a stable and safe environment for the child. When the judge delivered the verdict, it was a decisive victory for Ethan. He was awarded sole custody of Liam, with Sophie granted only limited visitation rights. The court emphasized that her visits would be supervised until she could demonstrate that she was capable of providing a stable and nurturing presence in Liam's life. Losing custody of Liam was the final blow for Sophie. She had always assumed that, no matter what, she would retain her role as Liam's mother. But the court's decision, and the cold distance she now felt from her son, made her realize just how much damage she had done. Liam, perceptive beyond his years, struggled to reconcile his feelings toward his mother. He didn't understand the full extent of what had happened, but he knew enough to feel hurt and betrayed. Sophie's actions had shaken his sense of security, and he clung to Ethan for stability. During her supervised visits, Sophie tried to connect with Liam, but the bond between them felt strained. He was polite but distant, answering her questions with one-word responses and avoiding eye contact. Sophie's attempts to explain herself only seemed to push him further away. "I'm still your mom, Liam," she said during one visit, her voice trembling with desperation. "I made mistakes, but I love you." Liam looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of confusion and sadness. "Why did you hurt Dad?" he asked softly. The question shattered Sophie. She had no answer that would satisfy him, no way to undo the pain she had caused. For the first time, she realized that rebuilding her relationship with Liam would require more than words. It would take years of effort, patience, and self-reflection. Sophie's downfall was complete. She had lost her husband, her career, her lover, and the trust of her son. The life she had once taken for granted was gone, replaced by a lonely apartment, a tarnished reputation, and the weight of her mistakes. Desperate to make sense of her situation, Sophie began attending therapy. Her therapist, Dr. Reynolds, encouraged her to take responsibility for her actions and confront the insecurities that had driven her decisions. It was a painful process, but Sophie knew it was the only way forward. Though she was far from redemption, Sophie began to take small steps toward rebuilding her life. She found a part-time job at a local cafe, far removed from the corporate world she had once thrived in. She attended parenting classes, hoping to prove to the court and to Liam that she was committed to being a better mother. But the road ahead was long and uncertain. Sophie's choices had left scars that wouldn't heal overnight, and she knew she might never fully regain the life she had lost. For now, all she could do was try to piece together the fragments and hope that, one day, she could find a way to make amends. Victor's downfall began the moment Detective Carter entered the picture. With a reputation for uncovering hidden crimes and exposing even the most cunning perpetrators, Carter wasted no time delving into Victor's past. What started as a probe into his personal relationship with Sophie quickly unraveled a web of deceit, fraud, and misconduct that spanned years. Detective Carter's investigation revealed that Victor had been siphoning company funds for personal use, including extravagant trips, luxury purchases, and even bribes to silence potential whistleblowers. His financial records painted a damning picture, with embezzlement figures running into hundreds of thousands of dollars. But that was just the beginning. As Carter dug deeper, he uncovered numerous reports of harassment from Victor's former employees. Women who had previously been too afraid to speak up now found their voices, emboldened by Victor's recent humiliation and the ongoing investigation. Melissa, a former assistant, shared her story of coercion and threats. Emily, another victim, came forward with incriminating emails and text messages that showed how Victor had used his position of power to manipulate her into compromising situations. Each new revelation added fuel to the fire. Detective Carter worked tirelessly to compile the evidence, presenting a comprehensive case to the district attorney. The charges against Victor piled up: fraud, harassment, embezzlement, and abuse of power. The case was airtight, ensuring that Victor would face the full force of the law. When Victor was arrested, the news made headlines. Pictures of him being escorted from his penthouse in handcuffs flooded social media, turning him into the poster boy for corporate greed and misconduct. His fall from grace was swift and public, leaving no doubt about his guilt. Victor's professional life, once the cornerstone of his identity, crumbled in spectacular fashion. The company he had led with an iron fist severed all ties, issuing a public statement condemning his actions and promising reforms to ensure such behavior would never occur again. His former colleagues, many of whom had tolerated his arrogance out of fear or self-interest, wasted no time distancing themselves. The board of directors, under pressure from stakeholders, filed a civil lawsuit to recover the embezzled funds, further tightening the noose around Victor's neck. The financial consequences of his actions were devastating. Victor's assets were frozen during the investigation, and his legal fees quickly drained what remained of his once impressive wealth. His sprawling mansion, luxury cars, and private investments were sold off to cover mounting debts and settlements with his victims. The man who had once flaunted his success at every opportunity now found himself living in a modest rental, a shadow of his former self. Victor's personal relationships suffered just as much as his professional ones. The few friends he had left abandoned him, unwilling to associate with someone so publicly disgraced. His family, including a brother who had once idolized him, cut off contact, unable to reconcile Victor's actions with the man they thought they knew. Alone and isolated, Victor was left to face the consequences of his choices with no one to turn to for support. Victor's collapse had far-reaching consequences, not just for him, but for everyone connected to him. His victims, many of whom had suffered in silence for years, finally saw justice served. The lawsuits and criminal charges brought them a sense of closure, allowing them to move forward with their lives. Sophie, once enamored by Victor's charm and promises, was forced to confront the reality of who he truly was. Watching his empire crumble and his true nature exposed left her feeling both humiliated and regretful. She had traded her marriage and family for a man who had manipulated her from the start. Though she tried to distance herself from the scandal, the damage to her reputation and self-esteem was already done. For Ethan, Victor's downfall was a vindication. The man who had tried to undermine his family and his integrity had been exposed for the fraud he was. While Ethan took no joy in Victor's suffering, he felt a sense of justice knowing that Victor would never have the power to hurt anyone else again. The culmination of Victor's collapse came during his sentencing. The courtroom was packed with reporters, former employees, and victims eager to see him held accountable. As the judge listed Victor's crimes and delivered a harsh sentence of 15 years in prison, the room buzzed with a mix of relief and satisfaction. Victor sat silently, his once proud demeanor replaced by a hollow, defeated expression. Detective Carter, who had been instrumental in bringing Victor to justice, later remarked, "He thought he was untouchable, but no one is above the law. People like Victor thrive on fear and manipulation, but when you shine a light on their actions, they fall apart." Victor's prison sentence marked the end of his reign of manipulation and greed. His name, once synonymous with power and success, became a cautionary tale, a reminder that actions have consequences and that even the most calculated lies can eventually unravel. Alone in his cell, Victor had nothing left but time to reflect on the choices that had led to his ruin. But for the people he had hurt, life moved on, free from his shadow. Victor's collapse wasn't just a personal failure. It was a victory for those who had suffered under his control. It was proof that justice could prevail, even against those who seemed untouchable. For Ethan, it was a moment of closure, a final chapter in a story of betrayal, resilience, and redemption. Ethan stood in the quiet of his newly arranged living room, sunlight streaming through the curtains as Liam laughed in the background. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt like a home again, a sanctuary from the chaos and betrayal that had once threatened to consume their lives. With the divorce finalized and Victor's toxic influence eradicated, Ethan resolved to focus on what truly mattered, rebuilding a stable, loving home for his son. Ethan threw himself into fatherhood with a renewed sense of purpose. He made it his mission to ensure Liam felt supported and loved despite the upheaval they had both endured. Weekends became sacred father-son time, filled with activities Liam adored, trips to the park, afternoons building intricate Lego sets, and movie nights where they'd munch on popcorn and laugh together. Liam, perceptive as ever, slowly began to blossom under Ethan's unwavering attention, his laughter and bright smile a testament to the healing they both needed. As Ethan nurtured Liam's sense of security, he also began to rediscover himself. The stress and turmoil of his marriage had caused him to lose touch with the passions and hobbies that once brought him joy. Now, with the space to breathe and reflect, he decided it was time to rekindle those parts of himself. One afternoon, while clearing out the garage, Ethan stumbled across his old woodworking tools he hadn't touched in years. The sight of them sparked a flood of memories of late nights spent crafting furniture and intricate designs, a creative outlet that once brought him so much fulfillment. He dusted them off and set to work, starting with small projects, a bookshelf for Liam's growing collection of books, a coffee table for their living room. The rhythmic hum of the saw and the smell of freshly cut wood became a form of therapy, grounding Ethan in the present while allowing his mind to wander freely. He also took up running again, something he had always loved but had let slip during the stress of his marriage. The early morning runs through the quiet streets of his neighborhood became a time for reflection and renewal. Each step felt like a release, each mile a reminder of his strength and resilience. By the time he returned home, drenched in sweat and filled with endorphins, he felt more centered, more himself. Ethan's days began to take on a steady rhythm. Fatherhood, work, woodworking, running. The routine was simple but fulfilling, a stark contrast to the chaos that had defined his life for so long. Slowly but surely, he felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a sense of peace and purpose. One evening, while having dinner with Chloe, Ethan mentioned how difficult it had been to balance everything, parenting, work, and his own healing. Chloe listened intently, her sharp eyes soft with understanding. After a moment, she leaned back and smiled. "There's someone I think you should meet," she said. "Her name's Rachel. She's a friend of mine from my book club. She's been through something similar. Her ex left her with 2 kids to raise on her own. She's one of the strongest, kindest people I know." Ethan hesitated. The idea of dating again felt daunting, almost impossible. "Chloe, I'm not sure I'm ready for that," he admitted. "I've got enough on my plate with Liam and everything else." Chloe reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm not saying you have to jump into anything, Ethan. Just meet her. She's not looking for anything serious either, just someone to talk to. And I think you two would get along." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed to meet Rachel, and Chloe arranged for them to have coffee at a quiet cafe. When Ethan arrived, he spotted her immediately, a woman with kind eyes, a warm smile, and an air of quiet strength. Rachel greeted him with a handshake and a friendly, "Chloe's told me a lot about you. It's nice to finally meet." The conversation flowed easily, surprising Ethan. Rachel shared her own story, how she had been blindsided by her ex-husband's betrayal, how she had fought to create a stable life for her 2 children, and how she was still figuring out what it meant to start over. Ethan found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, sharing his own struggles and triumphs. Over the weeks that followed, Ethan and Rachel continued to meet, their connection growing stronger with each conversation. They bonded over shared experiences, but it was more than that. Rachel's resilience and warmth inspired Ethan, and her laughter felt like a balm for his soul. She didn't push or rush him, allowing their relationship to develop at its own pace. Their children became fast friends, adding another layer of connection between Ethan and Rachel. Watching Liam play with Rachel's kids brought Ethan immense joy, a reminder that even amid pain, new beginnings were possible. As the months passed, Ethan and Rachel's relationship blossomed into something deeper. It wasn't built on grand gestures or whirlwind romance, but on a foundation of trust, mutual respect, and shared values. Rachel understood the challenges of starting over, the fears and insecurities that came with it, and she never pressured Ethan to be anything other than himself. For Ethan, being with Rachel was a revelation. With her, he felt seen and valued in a way he hadn't for years. Their relationship wasn't about filling a void or escaping the past. It was about building something genuine and meaningful together. They supported each other's healing journeys, cheering one another on as they navigated their new lives. One evening, as they sat on Rachel's porch watching their kids chase fireflies in the yard, Rachel turned to Ethan and said, "I'm glad we met. I didn't think I'd ever find someone who gets it, who really understands what it means to start over." Ethan smiled, reaching for her hand. "I didn't think I would either, but I'm glad we found each other." Ethan's life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was his. He had built something new, something real, out of the ashes of his old life. With Liam by his side, Rachel in his corner, and a renewed sense of purpose, Ethan felt ready to face whatever challenges came his way. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it served as a reminder of his strength and resilience, proof that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way forward. Ethan had never imagined himself as the kind of man to share his private struggles with strangers, let alone turn his pain into something meaningful for others. Yet here he was, standing in front of a small group of people at a community center, recounting his story with a calm confidence that he had earned through hardship and growth. The group, a mix of men and women at various stages of healing from betrayal and broken relationships, listened intently as Ethan spoke. He shared the raw truth of his journey, his shock at Sophie's betrayal, the humiliation of Victor's taunts, and the quiet determination that carried him through the storm. He didn't sugarcoat the pain or pretend it had been easy, but he emphasized the importance of holding onto one's values, even in the face of heartbreak. "Betrayal," Ethan said, his voice steady, "can feel like the end of the world. It rips apart everything you thought you knew, everything you built your life around. But it doesn't have to define you. What defines you is how you respond, whether you let it break you or use it to rebuild something stronger." The group members nodded, some wiping away tears, others exchanging knowing looks. Ethan's words resonated because they came from a place of authenticity. He wasn't there to preach or offer empty platitudes. He was there to show them that healing was possible, that they weren't alone in their struggles. Ethan also began writing about his journey. Late at night, after Liam had gone to bed, he would sit at his desk and let the words flow. He wrote about the lessons he had learned, the mistakes he had made, and the small victories that kept him moving forward. His essays were raw and unpolished, but they struck a chord with those who read them. Max encouraged him to share his writing online, and before long, Ethan's blog became a source of comfort and inspiration for others navigating similar challenges. Through these outlets, Ethan found a sense of purpose he hadn't expected. By sharing his story, he was able to turn his pain into something constructive, something that helped others find their own strength. And in doing so, he found closure. Not because he had forgotten what happened, but because he had made peace with it. Life had settled into a new normal for Ethan and Liam. Their modest but cozy home was filled with warmth and laughter, a stark contrast to the tension and uncertainty that had once clouded their lives. Ethan had made it his mission to create a space where Liam felt safe, loved, and free to be himself. One evening, after dinner, Ethan and Liam sat on the living room floor, surrounded by Lego pieces as they worked together to build a spaceship. Liam's face lit up with excitement as he explained his vision for the design, his hands moving quickly to piece it together. "Dad, do you think we'll finish it tonight?" Liam asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. Ethan chuckled. "At this rate, we might have to launch it tomorrow morning. But that's okay. We've got all the time in the world." Their laughter filled the room, mingling with the soft hum of music playing in the background. For Ethan, this moment was a reminder of everything he had fought for. Liam's happiness, their bond, and the life they were building together. When bedtime rolled around, Ethan tucked Liam in, listening as his son recounted the highlights of his day. Liam's questions about the past had grown less frequent, his focus shifting to the bright future ahead of them. It was a sign of healing, and it filled Ethan with quiet pride. As the house grew still, Ethan stepped out onto the porch, gazing up at the stars. The night was cool and peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil he had once endured. He thought about how far he had come, not just in rebuilding his life, but in rediscovering himself. The man who had once felt lost and broken now stood strong, grounded by the lessons he had learned and the people who had supported him along the way. Ethan returned inside, closing the door behind him. As he locked it, he felt a symbolic weight lift from his shoulders. The past was behind him now, locked away with the pain and betrayal that had once consumed him. Ahead lay a future defined not by what he had lost, but by what he had gained: resilience, peace, and the unshakable bond with his son. The final shot was of Ethan standing in the quiet of his home, a small smile on his face as he looked toward the future. He had faced the storm, weathered its fury, and emerged stronger for it. And as he turned off the lights and headed to bed, he carried with him the quiet certainty that brighter days were still to come.